of too many ads and dull, meaningless chat? We've got neither. Joy Drive, smart, fun radio. Theatre, film, TV and more. Suzy Rong reviews it all on Joy Drive.
Good afternoon, Suzy Rong.
Good afternoon, Warren. I had the best time on the long weekend. I went dancing for the first time in like 10 years.
Oh, did you?
Did you engage in some wrestling or some such activity on the weekend?
No, I didn't do any wrestling on the weekend. Not the kind that you're thinking of anyway. But I didn't go dancing. Was it fun?
It was great fun. Things have changed so much, like rave culture, I guess what you call it, because it was a daytime, like out in it was like a street party. They closed up the street, and even though it was a queer party, it was very different from what I remember it to be. It used to be very focused on the very cloney sort of gay men, but now it's just completely diverse. There were so many women.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and so many, people that just did not subscribe to those kind of old modes of masculinity and femininity. It was a really an eye-opener for me, really. I haven't been out there for so long.
10 years is a long time to have moved. Did you squeak? Did you have to oil yourself?
I have been keeping very fit.
Oh,
I can
good.
tell you that.
Okay, great.
I was doing much better than my friends who went along with me, who had gummies, who consumed some gummies that gave them a weird reaction. So I was the only one having fun in the group of four.
Fantastic. And you've got hot weather up there, you were saying.
Yeah, we're in the mid-30s today, and then which is weird. I know you're like 15 degrees over in Melbourne. But it's coming down. I think on Saturday it's going to be 17 or something.
You're going to send it down. Now, today we are talking about a movie which is in some cinemas and also streaming on Amazon Prime. It's called Cassandro. What is it about, Suzy?
That's right, Cassandro is the name of today's movie, a biopic about a famous character in Lucha Libre, a popular form of Mexican wrestling. You can watch it now on Amazon Prime Video. It traces a young man Saul's journey from obscurity to fame, initially as a masked luchador named El Topo, struggling to make a mark. But when he is inspired to take on the persona of Cassandro, a flamboyant, unmasked exotico, a sort of drag manifestation, a gay villain positioned against heroes of the wrestling ring, that's when he begins to get noticed. All of this takes place in the 80s and 90s when homophobia in Mexico was rife and in your face. Audiences at these events were encouraged to chant terrible homophobic slurs as though intentionally highlighting and galvanizing a common hatred for all queer people in their communities. Notwithstanding these incessant taunts, we watch Cassandro come into prominence and Saul's own homosexuality evolve along with his newfound celebrity as he leaves behind a closeted lover to become completely out and proud. The film is beautifully shot. In many ways, it's as much a tribute to the artistry of Lucha Libre as a cultural phenomenon as it is about one of its stars, Cassandro. The stuff about gay liberation is slightly muted. I found it lacking in passion, which is surprising for a movie that speaks mostly in Spanish. Starring Gael Garcia Bernal, who we know from movies like Bad Education and Y Tu Mamá También, he brings great sophistication to the film. It's an elegant, often appropriately understated performance. All the acting in Cassandro is excellent, but the writing just doesn't seem exciting enough, although I suspect that viewers familiar with Mexico might respond differently. I do think it's admirable that the filmmakers don't explain too much, so that it doesn't pander to those outside of the culture that it represents. We can simply Google anything we don't quite understand and in the process learn something new. Warren, we had the AFL last week with Danielle Lately, that doco, and now we're talking about wrestling, but with a lot of makeup and glittery costumes. How did you go with Cassandro?
Well, Suzy, before I go into that, I just want to say I think you're the most amazing film reviewer around. Your reviews are spot on.
Oh, good, thank you.
And I know the Joy Drive family think exactly the same. Exotico, I hadn't heard that term before, exoticos. And it just brings back this whole thing about the word exotic. And I know a few people who get offended by that word, but it's been, I suppose, embraced, and apparently the role of the exotico traditionally existed to reinforce negative gay stereotypes in Mexico. I didn't realise that, and these stereotypes needed to be, suppressed or destroyed by the tough heterosexual males, and that's where the whole term came from. So it's an interesting term, isn't it? Have you heard of it before, Suzy?
No, I know very little about I know nothing about this world, which is, I think, that for me, this film, that's the part that fascinated me. I went in thinking that it's going to be yet another movie about how someone overcomes, sort of these challenges that queer people have in life. But actually, there's very little of that. It was a lot more about just him becoming successful. Obviously, there are some stuff about him being gay and the things he had to overcome, but it didn't sort of take that kind of conventional route. But I did enjoy very much the way it was so lovingly portrayed these people involved in wrestling, men and women, and the way they shoot the fighting scenes. It made me get involved. Yeah.
I was thinking it when I was watching the movie. I thought, I think I want to go and watch some of this wrestling. I mean, it is staged, isn't it? It's not, they weren't physically hitting each other or hurting each other. It's like, it's a performance, and they agree who's going to win, and some money changes hands and what have you, and then the audience enjoys the performance, and effectively that's what it was. I want to go and see it.
Well, it's like the kind of wrestling that's probably more popular here, that I guess are the American type wrestling, where it all looks very hammy and it's a performance, except it seems like in Mexico they seem to go a bit further with the costumes. And obviously with this exotico, that's curious. Like, the film stops in the 90s. We don't see the sort of the later years, so we don't really know from this film. And from a bit of research, I know that there is CASSANDRO, a documentary. Haven't been able to find it in Australia, but hopefully one day we'll get to see it and maybe get more of an insight about that industry and how his career has evolved. And because it does feel like the film is saying that he changed the perception of what exotico means. And the film does have some really beautiful parts about how the stars of the time, one particular star of the time in that field of the Mexican wrestling, kind of gave him a leg up and kind of boosted his popularity by showing how this sort of alpha male was really appreciative of this exotico who's doing something different and doing it really well.
We are chatting with Suzy Wrong about Cassandro, which you can catch in cinemas or streaming on Amazon Prime at the moment. Just on the, I suppose, that male strength, it did get me thinking, as these films always do, Suzy. Do you want me to go on? The male strength, it's like when you watch it, and the whole idea of the exotico coming on and wrestling these people on stage, and they're a bit skinnier, they haven't got their face hidden or painted, they're not as puffed up as I suppose the typical male ones that always win. And it just, I don't know, it just perpetuated that whole stereotype about male strength having to come from crushing others who appear weaker. And I was thinking about that, and we've done that, haven't we? We make ourselves feel better by crushing people who are lesser than us, and that's where the whole wrestling thing was based on. And I thought that was rather profound in the movie.
Yeah, but what you have just articulated is the nature of the patriarchy. It is about making your position sort of meaningful through the oppression of others. Power only exists when there is subservience.
That's
and
right.
Like, we are so used to that idea that and in the queer community, even like we praise someone, we say yes, queen, like it's a massive appreciation of something. But we always forget that when there's a queen, she requires people to be subservient. She requires people to be under her. So it is still very much sort of a patriarchal form of organization. Yeah, and you're right to notice that in the film. Like, I don't think the exotico is the only type of villain. I'm sure there are many, many different types of villain. But the whole point of these sort of subsidiary characters is that they pump up what the ideal looks like, what the ideal should be like, and which is a reflection of what our real lives are, and that's not healthy.
Definitely, and I suppose there's something powerful too in that, Cassandro is flamboyant yet tough, and it got me thinking, we've all got that strength within us, haven't we? These external forces come and they try and beat us down, and they, what have you, but we've all got that strength. We can all be whoever we want. We can be flamboyant. We can be whatever. And it doesn't matter, because when it comes to it, once we're on the boxing ring, we're just as strong.
Yeah, I love that you brought this out, because in the film, I think some of the points that the film makes are really subtle. Like, it's not a very big dramatic piece of work, but it does make these points, and the performances are so sort of quiet and beautiful in the middle of a lot of noisy fighting. Like when it's behind the scenes, I thought the performances were quiet in a very lovely way. But I wonder if it makes it a bit hard to sort of sink your teeth into. I do feel like I had to work a little bit to get myself focusing and involved in the drama.
Yeah, me too.
Because the drama was very gentle. But what you said is completely right. Like, where does strength reside? What do you look like if you have strength? And what does power look like? And what the Exotico and what Cassandro did is, it is a form of subversion. Like, they're able to sort of introduce this idea that we are strong, even though we are perceived to be, completely the opposite.
And I'm going to get controversial here, Suzy, because I also think from this conversation, we need to look at ourselves as a community. I mean, I can speak for gay men who put other gay men down who don't necessarily have, the most beautiful body on earth or what have you. We can talk about, people attacking trans people within the community and saying, oh, they're not part of us. We've got to look at ourselves as well. It's not just the heterosexual straight males that are doing it. We also do it to each other. We learn it from them.
Yeah. What did they used to call it? What's that? Like internalized homophobia, right?
I think that's one term for it.
Yeah, I think it used to be, like everyone subscribed to it back in the day. When in the 90s it was very normalized that, that I think coming out of AIDS and all that, it became that, you had to have a certain kind of body, you had to have a certain kind of appearance to justify your existence, because if you're gay, you better not look anything like you're stricken with AIDS. I remember that sort of narrative
being
from that time. Yeah, and it's really awful. I think it's done a lot of harm to how we think of ourselves and think of how our lives could be. And it's taken a long time. When we started this conversation, I talked about going dancing on the weekend, and it reminded me of why I stopped going dancing. It just became a place that was so unpleasant for me as I started to transition, which was also like 10, 12 years ago. And these places were just so uncomfortable for me. Places that used to be, somewhat, that I felt somewhat part of a community. And then it just became like, as I, start to embrace my womanhood, it became such an uncomfortably masculine spaces that these places were. And, obviously I'm not a lesbian, so going to lesbian places are difficult in a different way. So I just simply dropped out and never went dancing until now. And I do feel like things have started to change. The younger generation is rejecting these old values, which is really good. And they're kind of understanding that, well, basically being queer people, we just have so much more possibilities open to us, and we need to explore those things.
I love the fact that you went out and you enjoyed yourself dancing and claimed that space. I think it's, I'll conclude by saying, it's easy to feel better by, I suppose, putting someone else down or saying they don't belong, but it takes a lot more strength to make yourself feel better from within than having to put someone down. Move yourself up.
Yeah, but, we cannot... We have to acknowledge that it's hard as well, right? Like, I think we behaved in those ways because we were such a oppressed community, and when you are that...
And we learned those behaviours.
Yeah.
At school.
And when you are in those positions, with so many challenges, it's basically also just like grasping at straws. You act like your oppressors, thinking that you're going to benefit like your oppressors, and aside from that, there were so few examples of how to thrive. I think that's one of those things. We didn't know how to thrive as queer people, but slowly, things are changing. Things are improving.
We are talking about Cassandro on Amazon Prime and in some cinemas at the moment. Suzy, are you going to be too busy dancing to watch something for next week, or have we got homework?
I'm so exhausted from 4 hours of dancing. I don't think I'll go again for another 10 years. The homework next week is a new comedy series on SBS. All 8 episodes of While the Men Are Away are available to stream. It's set during the 40s when the men go to war and the women get involved with each other in very intimate ways. That's While the Men Are Away, when I see you next Tuesday.
Thanks, Suzy.
Joy Drive on Joy 94.9 FM in Melbourne, Joy on your digital radio, iHeartRadio, TuneIn.com or the Joy app. No matter where you are.